All right, then. I believe that we are going to begin our exploration of villainy, because we are going to be writing our story's villain first. Pardon me. Sorry, that ginger ale. Anyway, if any of you would like to spend inspiration points, you can use them to get a workshop dice roll, and that will lock in something about the. I approach villains with caution because you never know what they're up to, Tio. You can lock in a part of the villain that we're going to be creating together in chat with a workshop dice roll for any of these particular aspects of the villain we're creating. Though before we even get to that point, and Tio, I will end up answering that question over the course of what we're doing here. I promise. That's part of the point, and why I want to lead with the villain. And for many of you out there, you might go, well, don't people read the books or the comics or whatever for the heroes? Absolutely. We love following in the footsteps of the hero, of the protagonist. Though, really, that the hero is the train set on the tracks, and the tracks are the villain and the villain's actions. And if we know what the villain is doing at all times, as an author, as a dungeon master, then we can make better improv and better considerations for telling the story, building the world, and interacting with our player characters. Or our readers, if we are an author in this instance. So knowing the villain, because the villain is already a part of the world, is already established in the world, already has money or power or contacts or a plot or secrecy or, whatever, blackmail or blah, 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 okay? The villain is already a part of things. It's just that the final reading, by the end user of your story, they don't know that information. But you should, as the author of the story or of the adventure. That's why we're going to start with that first. Though even before we get into these particulars, if you want to lock in any of your workshop dice rolls, I think that we need to explore villainy and some tools for consideration about who and what villains are. Because maybe a villain actually is not what you need for your story. And so yes, we are creating a villain, and yes, I am going to tell you that a villain may not be the character you wish to have. We're going to go back to, you might remember this from last night where we were talking about, find and replace things, the Y method. And if we come down here, hopefully you all can read this easily enough. I'll make this a little bit bigger just in case. What is a villain? A character in a play, novel, or the like who constitutes an important evil agency in the plot. Now, you can have several villains. It doesn't always have to be a villain. And I'm going to add the note, by the way, depending on the dictionary you use, there might be some differences in definition. Many times also called the BBEG in tabletop settings, which stands for Big Bad Evil Guy. Right? AKA the bad guy. Dun dun dun. Your story might actually be better without a villain, and instead you can create similar tension with a rival. A rival is a person who is competing for the same object or goal as another, or who tries to equal or outdo another, a competitor. If any of you play the Pokemon video game, you expect a rival and a villain of the story. Now, what about a foil? Who or what is a foil? Like you can use it as a verb or a noun. Foil, to keep a person from succeeding in an enterprise, plan, etc. Foils can be rivals. Foils can be villains. Foils can be an ally to, well, yeah, it could be a skinny pokey sword as well, or what you use to wrap your leftovers. Just don't put them in the microwave after. A foil could be someone on the team who is, even out of a sense of goodwill, trying to hamper progress and go, no, I don't think we should do this. No, we're not going to make it. No, this is dumb. Foils can be acts of nature, yes. The storm can foil the advancement of bringing the One Ring to Mount Doom. So a foil can be a character, and it can also be an object or a force of nature. But in this regard, because we're talking about characters in a story, I do want you all to be familiar with the nuance, because you might have characters that are wearing a couple different hats, or you might realize, you know what, my story is actually going, like, the villain is not going to be the main focus of the story. It's actually going to be the rivalry with another group or another person, because you can tell compelling tales that way as well. Super Troopers comes to mind. Super Troopers is definitely Super Troopers is definitely a story about rivalry. You could argue there's a villain, but I think the stress is more on the rivalry between the town cops and the Stadies in that movie. Now, what about an antagonist? An antagonist is a person who is opposed to, struggles against, or competes with another, an opponent, an adversary. Antagonists are often villains. Rivals and foils are also antagonistic characters. However, antagonists do not always have to be a villain, nor a rival. Probably a foil. There's a lot stronger connection. Though foil has a lot more of a general application, the antagonist is more character-centric. Pardon me. All right, who else do we have? Who else could be considered for the role of the villain in a story? Well, you also have anti-heroes. Is that like undead? An anti-hero isn't... So wouldn't that just make that person the villain, right? Hero, opposite of hero is villain, duh. So what's an anti-hero? An anti-hero is a protagonist who lacks the attributes that make a heroic figure, as nobility of mind and spirit, a life or attitude marked by action or purpose, and the like. Anti-heroes share some commonality with the reluctant hero, though an anti-hero would be a character like the Punisher. Are you all familiar with the Marvel character the Punisher? Krager, I'm not showing that I am dropping frames. I seem to have a solid connection. Though, if you all are... Oh, yeah, Spawn. Zrock, very good. Spawn. Black Adam. Ooh, topical freestyle. Venom. Would you all say Venom? Thank you. Goblin Town. You knew where I was heading. Guts from Berserk is absolutely an anti-hero. So this is someone who does heroic things, but does not consider him or herself necessarily heroic. Just because you kill monsters doesn't mean that you're a good person, or you're doing it for selfless reasons, to advance society or to save a particular person. The monster could have just been in your way. Right? In this case, you almost have evil fighting evil. The enemy of thy enemy. Would any of you consider Darth Vader to actually be an anti-hero? I guess with the adverb of ultimately. Ultimately. Villain with a redemption arc, okay. I'm sorry to hear, Kragar. Now, evil was brought up with the main definition of villain. A character in a play, novel, or the like who constitutes an important evil agency in the plot. And it's even in BBEG for Big Bad Evil Guy. Delport says no, because he doesn't achieve heroic ends, nor pursue them intentionally. If anything, he's an anti-villain. He does evil things for what he believes are heroic reasons. This is why I keep you around, chat. Very good. What is evil? Oh, that's a can of worms, especially if you get into discussions with friends or family around the tabletop. What is evil? Does evil exist? Can things be elementally evil? Are orcs evil? Are all orcs evil? Are all goblins evil? Are all beholders evil? Are all devils evil? What is evil, etc., etc. Now, I'm not posing that for you all to get you riled up. I'm simply saying that those conversations are out there, whether you accept them or not, or want to participate in them or not. But I do want to bring you over. I highly recommend you all, if you don't have a dictionary, a physical dictionary, just use something like dictionary.com, all right? Because as you are writing your adventure, as you are writing your novel, as you're writing your comic outline or whatever, having this open in a tab is great for you to understand, in this case, what is evil. Because in writing, your words have to make sense. Your words must be specifically used, otherwise it is word soup. It is mush. Nothing you write is going to mean anything. And as the author, you specifically say things for specific reasons. And if not, you're showing a misunderstanding of the language, which could lead into confusion in your reader or confusion in your players as you present something, and ultimately, that could lead to a bad time. Now, in this case, if we go to evil, dictionary.com says it's morally wrong or bad, immoral, wicked, harmful, detrimental. That which is evil, evil quality, intention, or... Now, of course, I don't like when the word is used in its own definition. The force in nature that governs and gives rise to wickedness and sin. The wicked or immoral part of someone or something. And what you can do is hop right over to thesaurus.com. Because if you say evil, 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 evil all the time, it can get monotonous, or you might not be conveying exactly what you want to convey. And if you go over to you have dictionary.com, you have thesaurus.com. These are here for you to use. Plus, if you want to sound a little bit more fancy, you can say you can say something like the malignant light filled the dripping chamber. The chamber which was filled with calamitous noise of chanting cultists. And there, in the middle of the malignantly lighted, calamitous-sounding chamber, was a bad guy. All right, so depending on what you're writing, use context, use some sense. Morally challenged, says Freestyle. Delport says, evil is a social construct and defined by society. Likewise, a narrative can purport evil on a subject and react accordingly. Morality is not objective not objective in the real world, but is often in a narrative. The morality of the work itself is often part of the point of writing. Also, relying on one term means your intent of that term isn't as well defined. So you can benefit from synonyms because it helps the reader perceive the nature of the evil or whatever other conceit. So please, all of you out there, you don't need a subscription. All you need is an internet connection, free to use. Go to dictionary.com and learn you them purty $2 words. Learn you them purty $2 words. Use the thesaurus as well. Now, let's get back to villainy. Because just like there are different words for villains, we went over villain, rival, foil, antagonist, anti-hero, and then of course we left off on evil because what is evil? What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more. There are different kinds of villain. Even if a villain that matches this definition, there are still several types of villains that can exist within the main definition of villain. Thank you, Goblin Town. And I want to illustrate this in a couple different ways. Now, We're keeping it PG-13. I'm allowed one F-bomb, and I think somewhere on one of my reference pictures, we're going to have our F-bomb. So just as a heads up, okay? Warning. Let's look at examples of villains. Hi, Crispy Bangs. Good to see you. How powerful or how motivating is your villain? Villains who are just evil or lust for power. Many of you are probably familiar with this character. How many of you are familiar with this character? And why is this an example of a villain, but would be a villain in this tier? I mean, if any of you are familiar with this character, you can shout him out in chat as well. But do any of you know this character? Hey, also howdy, Bane. I'm sorry it's blurry for you, Kragar. That is the dragon in, or wait, was that Dragon Age or Dragon's Dogma? Well, shoot. Now you have me doubting. We'll get to that, Kappa, don't worry. Yeah, Dragon Age, I'm sorry. Although, you might be able to argue that the dragon in Dragon's Dogma is also in this same tier of villain. Now, let's move up. Alright, we have Poo tier. Right? This isn't even poutine. Poutine is delicious and people look forward to it. These are just villains that are... I'm evil. Evil? Their entire existence is just, you know, to be a bad person who does bad things. And that's about as deep as it gets. Meh tier. Villains whose motives are a mystery and seem almost insane at times. Hey GMV, good to see you. We have the Joker and Hannibal Lecter. This at least shows that they have some motivation. Right? They put some thought into it. There's something else there. They aren't just a monolith, you know, a monolithic elemental evil force. However, if you chalk it up to, I'm wacky, then, okay, like, okay, you must have thought about things, but that also undermines the depth of your villainy. Now, let's continue up the chain. A mid-tier villain. Villains who are only obeying their nature and doing what they do to survive. This, of the two, many of you might be familiar with this villain. Do you all know who or what this is? And then, question, do you know who or what this other one is? Villains who are only obeying their nature. Yep, so Lavos is the one on the left. Villains who are only obeying their nature and doing what they do to survive. Because now, the villain is more understandable. You don't like what the villain is doing as the hero, but at least you understand why it's happening. And your purpose in going against it. Beyond, well, I'm wacky, or just beyond, I am the bad guy. I am the bad guy of the story, and I do the bad guy things in the story. Now, let's continue to rise up. We have a high-tier villain. A high-tier villain. Villains who are retaliating against the misdeeds done to them. They may be seeking to change society as a whole. Now you're getting purpose that is more than just a baseline purpose. You know, you're talking about Magneto up there. Villains who are retaliating against the misdeeds done to them. They may be seeking to change society as a whole. Now, does that redeem Magneto from murdering people? No. I would still say Magneto does villainous things and can be considered a villain. However, you are understanding more about the villain. The villain is deeper, a little bit more complex. You can now start to get more of a moral question of the villain, rather than just being an elemental force. Let's move a little bit higher. A great tier villain. John Arrhenius from Baldur's Gate next to Magneto. A great tier villain. Reluctant villains who only do evil things because of the situation they find themselves in. Well, I mean, Bane, so on charts like this, there's wiggle room, depending on the arc or depending on one thing or the other. But we have because he, for Mr. Freeze, he did not want to be evil and do evil things. He's doing evil things because of his situation, because of the love for his wife. You know, because of the fact that, it was, she was taken from him, or so he feels. These are people who find themselves in a particular situation. They didn't want to become the bad guy, but the only way to get things done is to become the bad guy. And then, as Kragar has pointed out, the Elder God tier of villainy. Yes, Video Gothic. The Elder God tier of villainy. Ozymandias. Villains whose motives are hard to find fault in and are arguably better than the heroes. And those are in many instances the most compelling, are even fun villains, because you want to hate them, and at the same time you question. Well, Bane, if people want to slot them in somewhere. Let's take another look. And by the way, it reaches the same conclusion, right? A poo tier villain. A villain has no thematic connection to the hero and is just a generic obstacle. In this case, a villain, an agent, but also a foil. It's just a big roadblock, right? Well, so where's the thematic? Doomsday was created to just kill Superman, and that was it. If we're talking in a broad meta sense. Yeah, he got better. Mid-tier villains. The villain has a thematic connection to the hero, but is a simple character with basic motives. Now, I don't know about you all, Darkseid is a very elemental, evil character. There is a lot of thought, or plotting to Darkseid. Well, maybe it's just in the development they were given in the comics, Bane. That could be the difference. So whether or not you agree with the pictures that were used, at least let's focus on the concept, on the text. these are here to try and reinforce the text. I want to put focus on the text, but we can argue. You're like, what, Doomsday? Nah, okay, I get it. Like, there's probably even better by being worse examples of villainy than Doomsday or Darkseid. Then we get to high tier villains. Villain has both a thematic connection to the hero and interesting personal conflicts of their own. So in a sense, forget the pictures are even there. Let's make sure that this is the main focus. Though in the example, the villain has both a thematic connection to the hero and interesting personal conflicts of their own. They are arguably the protagonist of their own story. And someone up above brought that up earlier tonight. And this is also something to bring up. Most villains, especially most compelling villains, don't wake up in the morning, go to the bathroom, brush their teeth, stand in front of the mirror and go, I'm a bad guy and I do bad guy things. That's villainy down here and maybe at best mid-tier villainy. There are not many villains who just go, I'm the bad guy. Especially here, the last sentence. They are arguably the protagonist of their own story. And the ultimate villain? There is no villain. Though there is a projection, a perceived villain. Now, why is Ozymandias brought up in two different lists as the ultimate villain? This is the reason why. Do it? Dan, I'm not a Republic serial villain. Do you seriously think I'd explain my master stroke if there remained the slightest chance of you affecting its outcome? I did it 35 minutes ago. Now, I tried in the broadcast campaign. I tried to achieve Elder God status with the villain. Or at least as the perceived villain. I don't think I have any of my players in chat, or at least if so, they're lurking. I really, really tried to achieve Elder God status, which is kind of ironic given the fact that the Great Old One was considered the main villain, who didn't necessarily turn out to be a villain with the twist, etc., etc. But I tried. And you all can watch that on YouTube. Dun, 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 dun. Hi, YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube in the future. All right, I'm sorry. So yeah, here's our F-bomb for the night. So I'm sorry I warned you, everyone. Imagine a video game where you create a hero whose destiny is to save everyone, but throughout the game you start making harder and more questionable decisions, and the game gets darker and darker, and in the end, you're just standing there, clutching the controller, and finally realizing you were playing the villain all along. Not gonna lie, I'd like that. I think it'd be an amazing storyline to a game. I think that absolutely would. And that's why the most compelling villains are either not villains, or the party really, in a D&D consideration, the party really has to consider, are they the bad guys the whole time? Oh, yeah, it was just a mistype. It was duck, yeah. Those are fun villains. Sometimes I walk past a graveyard and I think I could dress up like a ghost and haunt the S out of that cemetery for like weeks before anybody noticed and stopped me. And then I realized that I was headed down a road that leads to Scooby-Doo villainy. Now, Scooby-Doo does have villains. They're the ones who want to inherit Old Man McGillicuddy's mansion on the hill. They're the ones who want to scare everyone away from the museum so they can steal, I don't know, a precious object or whatever. They are villains, but this is it was Old Man Jenkins the whole time. Yeah, who's the villain all along? Oh, it's Old Man Matty. By the way, if any of you actually have the family name McGillicuddy, then you at one point, I hope that you actually can come into ownership of a house on a hill somewhere, and so one day you can become Old Man or Old Woman McGillicuddy, and live on a house on a hill somewhere. I'd have all the plushies if it wasn't for this meddling kid. And so these are villains that are a little, they're lower on the scale. You get it. These are meh tier. I was the mayor of a town and all this income and political clout and everything, but I had to own I had to own Old Man McGillicuddy's mansion, and so I threw it all away for the deed, or, you're like, okay, I mean, it's a villain, but it's also a 30-minute, actually 22-minute Scooby-Doo cartoon episode. So you don't exactly get a lot of compelling villains in an episodic style adventure. Now, if you go up to longer form stories, I don't know, you could probably... Megatron would at least be mid-tier villain. Depending on the story in which you're reading about Megatron, maybe Super Generous would be a great tier villain, but I think I could comfortably settle for Megatron being a high tier villain. Villains who are retaliating against misdeeds done to them. They may be seeking to change society as a whole. Yeah, Megatron. Yeah. No, I'm talking about Megatron from Transformers. Magneto. We talked about Magneto earlier. I'm bringing up Megatron because I was talking about Scooby-Doo as an episodic, going against villains once per episode, and then bringing into something that's more long form, you get a more well-developed villain where Megatron is at least a mid-tier villain. Maybe, depending on the story arc, could hit temporarily a great tier villain, but I would settle for a high tier villain. Bane, hero villain? I don't care. I just want to have 2 7s for my horde.
Hero? Villain? I don't care. I just want to have $2 $7 for my horde. And stand to cause confusion in the story. Also $2 $7 to the horde. Labels mean nothing to me.
Alright then. So we will get that going here real soon then for you, Bane. I'm almost finished with this part of our villain workshop, our villainous discussion. Well, for the same reason, Bane, that in any sci-fi story, you have the Space British, and the Space British are always the bad guys. Oh, we're in a sci-fi thing, and an English accent comes over the comms. Yep, that's the villain right there. I know who the bad guy of the story is. Yeah, so with that interruption, Bane establishes himself as a mid-tier villain. Bane is just doing what's in his nature to survive. Yeah, I'm actually a great tier villain. Thank you. Yeah, he does it because of the situation, right? Right. And remember as well, going over it one more time, the low tier villains, there's no thematic connection to the hero and is just a generic obstacle. By the way, this is why we're going to establish our villain first before the hero, because the hero is going to live in a world that, as a consequence, has this villain participating in it. So we can establish a connection with the hero. A mid-tier villain has a thematic connection to the hero, but is a simple character with basic motives. A high-tier villain, the villain has both a thematic connection to the hero and interesting personal conflicts of their own. The villain does not just exist as job security for the hero. They are arguably the protagonist of their own story. I mean, but compared to the others, Woden, it's almost a throwaway. Like, we need something. Experiment. You know, we can hem and haw about the pictures that were a part of this. But yes, it ultimately I want to make sure that this is what we're paying attention to. Yeah, as Bane said, depends on the lore you follow. Theatrically, he was born to kill Superman. That's about it. I mean, you know. Now, why do I bring up job security for heroes? Oh, I missed some chat here. I'm sorry, real quick. Depends on the lore you follow. Okay, so there's that. It was a very weak connection. It was a way to kill God. Yep, that was that. Zump says, Letho of Galette is an interesting villain from Witcher 2. He's killing morally gray kings and causing chaos, but he's doing it to rebuild his dying out school of Witchers. You almost feel bad for him at the end. He's not really an evil guy. The Witcher, so the novel and the video games that emulate that part, and especially the role-playing game. For any of you out there is a Witcher role-playing game. It highly encourages conflict that is more mid to high tier villainy that you go against. Yeah, you're a monster hunter and you take care, you flush the poo, okay? But ultimately, there's a lot of moral decisions to make in The Witcher, which is, I think, a part of the appeal. Then later, Superman is shown he can just kill Doomsday with his heat vision like he's nothing. Funny thing is, they don't need to invent anything to kill Superman. He's more resistant to magic than a regular person. Just have a powerful wizard kill him. Oh yeah, like magic is one of the weaknesses besides kryptonite. You love the Witcher RPG, says Rip. Bane says, but turns out that the guy who sent you to kill that monster actually created him and was torturing the monster all along. Exactly. There's twists in all of that. So there's actually there can be some compelling things. Maybe the monster is still one-dimensional, but you learn that aspect in the hunt or bringing it down that brings you back to the true monster who was, the one who contracted you, along the way. So yes, I brought up as well. I brought up the job security because, in a sense, yes, villainy is job security for heroes. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but if you all have your Dungeon Master's guides out, not only are we going to use this in the next workshop part to build a villain, the book talks about different types of villains. Different kinds of foils, antagonists. There are tables that will help you with all of this. Event-based adventures. In an event-based adventure, the focus is on what the characters and villains do and what happens as a result. The question of where those things happen is, of course, of secondary importance. Building an event-based adventure is more work than building a location-based one, but the process can be simplified by following a number of straightforward steps. Several steps include tables from which you can choose adventure elements or roll randomly for inspiration. So, start with a villain. Putting care into crafting your villain will pay off later, since the villain plays such a pivotal role in advancing the story. Use the Adventure Villains table in the previous section to get started, and use the information in Chapter 4 to help you flesh out the villain. For example, your villain might be an undead creature seeking to avenge a past imprisonment or injury. An interesting aspect of an undead villain is that this past injury might have occurred centuries ago, inspiring revenge against the descendants of those that harmed it. Imagine a vampire imprisoned by members of a religious order of knights, and who now seeks revenge against the current members of that order. Determine the villain's actions. Once you have a villain, it's time to determine what steps the villain takes to achieve its goals. Create a timeline showing what the villain does and when, assuming no interference from adventurers. And there is more that it'll get into, because we're talking about, what is the big event? Is it a bunch of crime? Is it a crime spree? Serial crimes that might escalate? Something that's just step by step, gather this resource, gather this, as you're making the doomsday machine, etc. Is it a growing corruption? Just simply a one and done. And then it'll take you through the process, of NPCs, how will the villain react in different ways as the story plays out. Because if you know the motivation of the villain, which is why we're creating the villain first, it'll be a lot easier to do, and your world will feel a lot more living and dynamic, and it'll come naturally to you. By their actions, villains provide job security for heroes. Chapter 3 helps you determine suitable villains for your adventures, while this section helps you flesh out their evil schemes, methods, and weaknesses. And we're going to follow these tables in the workshop. Some class options. This is going to be more or less the approach we're going to take for our fantasy novel that we are writing over the course of this month in the workshop. Will we end up with a mid-tier villain? An Elder God tier villain? Maybe. I don't know. That's going to be partly up to what we do a little bit later here tonight. But we will have a villain. The villain will be doing something. We're going to have a main character and the party that supports the main character in the ultimate build-up to the confrontation with the villain. And lastly, because we did bring up Eberron, and Eberron is a way of playing D&D. Hey, y'all can talk about it in chat, Bane. If y'all are having fun, have fun. As long as it stays fun. Now, I can't promise if you enrage someone on YouTube, a month from now who stumbles across this. If so, hi person, please don't, please, if you're reading in chat above, don't get, just look at the fall decor and feel peace in your heart. But I brought up Eberron because Eberron is a different way, where you're still playing D&D, though a different kind. It's the more street level D&D. It's the grittier. It's the noir D&D. It's detective D&D. Not that you can't have airship combat and vast warscapes and all this other stuff. You can in Eberron, absolutely. But Eberron does put a little bit more focus on villainy than even what the DMG puts out there. So, this is Eberron Rising from the Last War. Go out to your friendly local game store and pick up a copy. It has a lot of good content in it, as well as not just the player content, but these things for your consideration. Get your own Eberron adventures up and running. Using the inspiration in this chapter. Eberron is filled with political intrigue, extraplanar threats, magical mysteries, and back-alley detective work, all in the context of a world emerging from the turmoil of war. It'll link into the DMG. This chapter begins with a look at 3 key themes that pervade many Eberron adventures: recurring villains, action, and intrigue. Following that overview is an in-depth look at various organizations and other elements. So I'm not going to worry about that part of the in-depth, but we're hitting villainy. What is a villain, especially in an Eberron style? A group of adventurers leaves the dark, rainy city, putting its mean streets behind them. They board a flame-ringed airship for a journey across the continent, but they're attacked by wyvern-riding bandits on the way and must fight for their lives as the airship hurtles toward the ground. After surviving the crash through a combination of quick thinking and heroic effort, they find themselves stranded in the gray mists of the Mornland, facing the dangers of a war-ravaged land as they try to find their way back to their original destination. The greatest horrors they are about to face might be the ones that lurk in the depths of their own hearts. As discussed in the introduction of this book, pulp adventure and noir intrigue are 2 major themes that interlace in Eberron. Weaving these themes together or exploring either one in isolation can give Eberron stories a unique feel. Adventurers that take advantage of those themes help to reinforce a sense of place, immersing the players and you in a world that is still reeling from the effects of 100 years of war, that is shaped by modern ideas and aesthetics, and that is set apart from the rest of the D&D multiverse by a magical barrier. The most effective villains are the ones that return over and over to plague their heroic nemeses. When the heroes foil the schemes of an evil mastermind, the clever villain escapes to fight another day. A well-developed recurring villain can put a face to the sinister conspiracies that lurk in the darkness and thus strengthen the player's sense of immersion in the world. You can make a recurring villain in your campaign more intriguing by introducing moral ambiguity into the villain's background, possibly through references to the individual's experiences during the last war. Oh, wait a minute. So we're maybe starting at mid-tier, but this is a solid argument right out of the gate for high-tier and great-tier villains in Eberron. Have lackeys do the work. A villain can easily postpone that first face-to-face confrontation with the adventurers by having lackeys soften the party up, all the while making sure that the adventurers know whom they work for, thus enhancing the villain's reputation. Use all available resources. This does include watching the party, as they get on the radar, adapting to them. Have an escape plan. Take hostages. Even returning from death. Now, as a comic enjoyer, I actually do not like returning from death, because it makes everything, in my opinion, broadly, okay, those are my qualifications to this statement. Coming back from the dead is lazy writing. It also means that there are no stakes, and that ultimately conflict is meaningless, because as long as you have a particular resource, whether it's money, a gemstone, or whatever, death doesn't matter. It's no longer dangerous, it's no longer a mystery, it's no longer a threat, and as well, even from the hero's point of view, that then almost gives death impunity to murder people. Oh, they could just come back to life. And character deaths don't mean anything. That's why in my D&D games, I don't have... resurrection doesn't exist. I allow revivify, because that's like a defibrillator machine, or giving CPR to someone whose heart just stopped, or they just stopped breathing, and you're doing a Heimlich on them. That's allowed, but bringing back from the dead. Mm-mm. Because death should mean something, in my opinion, for storytelling purposes, in a general sense. Improving villains. Adventurers get more powerful over time, so if a villain is going to remain a relevant threat, the villain needs to get more powerful as well. There are 3 ways you can approach this issue: mechanical improvement, NPC stat blocks, organizations as villains. So it's not just a villain. Now all of a sudden, the A villain turns into all of the villains. Mysterio turns into the Sinister Six as villains. Shades of evil. Moral ambiguity is a feature of the noir genre and can add richness and complexity to an Eberron adventure. In a world where a red dragon isn't necessarily evil and a bronze isn't necessarily good, it's impossible to know who you can trust, and even the actions of a so-called villain might not fit neatly into clear-cut definitions of good and evil. Evil? Even adventure villains are more often driven by human motives than by cosmic concepts of good and evil. People sometimes do evil things for good reasons. Right up here. Even, high end of high tier, solid great tier villainy. Exercise some caution when exploring these noir themes in stories you develop. It can be fun for some people to wrestle with moral quandaries and adventures, but it doesn't work for all play groups. In particular, if there's no good solution to the quandary, if the characters have no choice but to follow a course of action they abhor, some players might end up unhappy. In the meta, you would be talking to them. It would either be known session 0, hey, we're doing morally gray, noir style. I'm going to put you in a lot of moral wiggle areas, you're going to have to wiggle around issues, or you're going to have to make a choice that is the better, the better of 2 evils. It's a hard decision sort of thing. Waylaying a party, especially if you're doing beer and pretzels, D&D, kick in the door, kill the goblin in the dungeon, kick in another door, kill the lich that's right next door for whatever reason. If you throw in moral quandaries, that group is probably going to be a lot more frazzled than people who from the outset know that this is going to be, that grittier style where your villain is actually going to make you think and feel. This is no thinking and feeling. This is some thinking. This is, solid thinking. This starts getting into thinking and feeling. This is thinking and empathizing. This is probably thinking and even acceptance, even though you still have to do what you have to do. The morally ambiguous villains table offers some twists you can add to the villains in this chapter, giving them more or less good reasons to perform their evil deeds. As an example, the villain is rising to power through entirely legal means, winning popular support through generous campaign promises, and working within the system. Now, we have literally no real-life examples of this happening. I say, by the way, everyone, it is the 4th day of November here in the United States. The villain you know. Not every villain is a mastermind who schemes in the shadows or a world-destroying horror. Sometimes the most significant villain is someone the characters see every day. Someone who moves around society in plain sight, but keeps their evil deeds well hidden. The law enforcers and adventurers who are trying to bring the villain to justice are thwarted at every turn, unable to find proof of the villain's crimes. If the players come to loathe the villain, everything is going according to plan. Use the villain you know table, and here's an example. A cowardly politician fleeces the poor of their last few coins without technically doing anything wrong. The mysterious villain. In contrast to a villain who is part of the character's everyday life, an otherworldly villain isn't only anonymous, but also fundamentally mysterious. It's not just a question of who the villain is, but also a question of what the villain is, and what extraordinary measures might be required to put a stop to their villainy. Even after the adventurers discover that their long-term nemesis is one of the Inspired, for example, they still need to learn the secrets of the Inspired and their quarry masters in order to figure out how to deal with the threat. Again, there's more here. I'm not going to read everything verbatim. I want you to go get your own copy of this book, support your friendly local game store. In the process, it's a win-win for everyone involved. Ultimate evil. Some mysterious villains wield enough power to threaten the entire world through colossal strength, mastery of magic, dizzying intellect, or overwhelming charisma, or some combination of those factors. These villains typically lurk in the shadows, pulling the strings, etc. Driving forces. Most villains in this category are numbered among the driving forces described later in this chapter. You can use the villain you don't understand table to choose. You can get from there. Cults of the Dragon. This is specific to Eberron. And it goes into, action, intrigue, etc. So, these are Eberron-specific things. I'm not necessarily saying that we're going to write an Eberron story or villain, but of the books, this does a lot to get into concepts of villainy, concepts of villains in D&D, which can be extrapolated into just us writing everything in a controlled manner for the reader, and not for, 4 or 5 people at a table, 6 people making random dice rolls and random moral choices. Because then things are completely in our control to entertain the reader along the way. But this book gets more into things here, up in the upper echelons of evil, of villainy, than the DMG does in a generic presentation of, villains are kind of like this, here's some inspirations. Like, it's the Skeleton Master. Oh no, undead equals bad. And this person uses bones to hurt other people, and so that's the villain. Who's the bad guy? Alright, so Bone Master is probably, a meh-tier villain in that regard. Like, okay, vaguely necromancy's bad, and just there's, a plan, but we're never really aware of it, but we do know we have to stop the Skeleton Master. Okay. It's a villain. Though I hope that we can write something together this month, and especially inspire you all to understand these concepts of villainy. Have a good night, Zump. Thank you for hanging out. I'm gonna get up and get a little snack, and also I'm gonna open up the giveaway that Bane has going on here, and so we'll give away some capsules. Bane, when I get back, I'll open up your capsules as well, and then we're gonna get into actually creating our very own villain. And if you want to spend your inspiration points on a workshop roll, indicate what here you would like to roll for as we go through, and we will create the villain of our story. So I'll be back in just a little bit, everyone. I got to open up the giveaway first.